Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Opening the Door, Welcoming Everyone to the Sacrament of Reconciliation. My name is Rachel Chung, and I'm the coordinator of the Disabilities Ministry with the Office of Deaf and Disabilities Ministries with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary O'Mara, and I'm the Executive Director here in the Office of Deaf and Disability Ministries. We're delighted to share this time with you today. What we'd like to do is just begin, as we begin all things, with prayer. So if we could just quiet ourselves for just a moment as we place ourselves in God's presence. We begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, let thy peace fill me up until I overflow, that where people cannot speak, I may be their advocate, that where anyone is rejected, I may extend my arms in welcome, that where parents are heavy burdened, I may offer a word of comfort, that where our children struggle, I may lift them up and cheer, that where some see disability, I may reveal to them extraordinary gifts, that where others judge, I may share with them my deep gladness, and that where any are overlooked, I may help the lights of all to shine. O giver of these gifts, grant that I may not so much seek to be reassured as to reassure, to be praised as to praise, to be accepted as to accept. For it is in all our uncertainty that we are inspired to hope. It is in great challenges that we discover our greatest joys, and it is in our community of wanderers that we find the way home. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So again, welcome everyone to our webinar today. Let us begin with one of the best teachers, the best teacher on welcoming people with disabilities, Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus encounters people with disabilities in an intimate way. He touches them, forgives their sins, and brings them back into community. Pictured here is the gospel of the healing of the man who was paralyzed. We can see here the hands of the community lowering the man through the roof so that he may be healed and touched by Jesus. Again, Jesus models this welcome. He touches the man and asks first to forgive his sins. Then he offers him a physical healing. This mosaic is pictured here, is also in the St. John Paul II shrine here in Washington, D.C. And again, a beautiful model for us on how Jesus models that welcome, but also how community is needed. Community is needed to bring people with disabilities fully into the church. We see in other gospel accounts, again, of Jesus encountering people living with disabilities in a meaningful way, one-to-one, and truly listening to them. Oftentimes, Jesus even asks, "What would you like me to do for you?" Jesus doesn't assume that the person wants a physical healing. He asks them again first, what would that he like them to do for them. Again, Jesus models this welcome. And of course, part of that forgiving of sins and healing brings the person back into full community.
And as someone comes into our community, what they're asking us to do is to open the door for them. I'd like to introduce you to Abby. Abby is seen here on her confirmation day, where she received First Holy Communion and confirmation. And this was an opportunity for Abby where the door was open. For Abby and her family, it wasn't the first time they knocked on the door. They had tried several parishes where the door was not open to them, and their family had left the church. When they knocked one last time, by God's grace, there was a DRE present that responded by saying, "Yes, I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but let's work together for a yes, to open the door." And Abby then came into the church. Abby presented as a person who is both deaf and blind and had some cognitive struggles as well. So finding a catechist that could work with Abby, we did work with a deaf catechist who worked one-on-one with Abby and brought her to this beautiful day that you see depicted here. And our canon, it is very clearly stated that sacred ministers cannot deny the sacraments to those who seek them at appropriate times, are properly disposed, and are not prohibited by law from receiving them. So our canon law is very clear that opening the door, extending the welcome, ensuring all are valued, is what the church is asking for us to do. That canon then continues by stating, "It is necessary and dignified to accompany them in the life of faith." They said, insisting that catechists must find new ways to teach the faith with distinct language and methods attuned to the needs of the disabled. This came from the International Day of Persons with Disabilities in 2020. The most important factor, again, is the ability to open the door. For as we know, each of us is in need of forgiveness. As Pope Francis shares with us, let the church always be a place of mercy and hope where everyone is welcomed, loved, and forgiven. Our own call to holiness, our universal call for holiness, reaches each of us to this journey of faith. No one is excluded from this call, and each of us is in need of forgiveness. Persons living with or without disability, we all answer this same call to holiness and share in the same experience of human frailty and sin. None of us is excluded.
So let us turn to what our church teaches us on the Sacrament of Reconciliation. Some here may be familiar with the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops guidelines for the celebration of the sacraments with persons with disabilities. These guidelines are here for us to help us as catechists, clergy, and lay leaders as we work with people with disabilities in the reception of the sacraments. And please note, these guidelines were updated in 2017 and are available for download. So let's review some of the guidelines specifically, again, regarding the Sacrament of Reconciliation. As we shared in the beginning, Catholics with disabilities have a right to participate in the sacraments as fully as any other members of the church. Us as pastoral leaders, ministers, we should not presume to know the needs of the person with disabilities. But first, of course, as Jesus models for them, us, ask what they need and consult perhaps again with other advocates and caregivers. Now, we know that we work with and support some people living with disabilities that perhaps could not describe precisely in words the sin, but they still may receive that absolution. And even sorrow for sin can be accepted if it's shown through gestures, such as laying your head down or casting your eyes downward. Again, that's a gesture that can show sorrow for sin. And continuing on regarding communication, specifically for people living with autism or perhaps a brain injury, or even our elders that may have experienced a stroke, we know that they may have those difficulties communicating with words. We know they communicate in other ways, but perhaps they experience that specific challenge. It is permitted that they may use a communication system during their confession. This may actually include technology. Again, these updates in 2017 wanted to highlight that different technology systems, such as iPad or even using iPhone, are permissible during confession. And us, and perhaps our clergy, we can help guide them that we are to work with those families and people living with disabilities so that we can understand best how they communicate, including, again, the use of technology. And this goes to the physical access sign as well, which we know in some of our churches, the confessional may be difficult to enter if a person uses a wheelchair or other type of mobility device. So we have to adapt. And of course, again, knowing our parishioners and knowing their needs, we can prepare for even face-to-face or other ways to make the confession private if they so choose.
We'd like to take a moment just to speak about the reception of the Sacrament of Reconciliation with persons who are deaf. We are blessed here in the Archdiocese of Washington to have a deaf priest working with us. And so there is access to the Sacrament of Reconciliation face-to-face with our priest here on staff. So we're very blessed here in this Archdiocese to have that resource. It's important to note that Catholics who are deaf should have the opportunity to confess to a priest in American Sign Language, ASL, if that is their primary means of communication. Or they may make their confession through writing or an appropriate device that is passed back and forth between the penitent and the confessor. Materials are always returned immediately to the penitent and destroyed or deleted afterwards. That would be the responsibility of the penitent. A last way that is allowable through the guidelines is that a confession can be made through the use of a sign language interpreter. I must give a caveat to this last allowable method of experiencing the sacrament. We would not encourage this. It is not, most of our sign language interpreters know our deaf community and vice versa. The deaf community is very small and very close, and this does set up an awkward situation that there are many other ways to experience the sacrament without the use of a sign language interpreter. Where it is necessary, it is allowable, but it probably would not be your go-to. For those confessors who are not familiar with American Sign Language, there are even apps on our iPhones now or our Android phones that text can be passed back and forth and then erased at the end of the sacrament. That would be, I would think and suggest, a better option. Let's take a moment now just to think about some of the challenges with the Sacrament of Reconciliation. For this sacrament poses many challenges for the confessor, the catechist, the penitent, the child with limited communication skills, persons with a disability that do not use words to communicate or uses a device to communicate. One thing that we would note is in most instances, those persons that are using some sort of a device are most likely to come in with an iPad. There used to be various devices that were used in school systems. They've all kind of moved over to a tablet-based platform where an app is used on a tablet. So in most cases, what you would see is some form of an iPad or tablet. When pastors contact the Office of Deaf and Disability Ministry, most often the request is assistance with this sacrament. And the logistics, I would say, are what is the greatest question. How is this possible? What are some things that are allowable and not allowable? And even making our DREs and our clergy and pastoral associates aware of these guidelines that are available is a great gift for them to learn about. Many people don't even realize that the guidelines are available to them. Parents or caregivers do not always see reconciliation as necessary. And if I could just take a moment to elaborate a little there. Oftentimes we have a concept where a child living with a disability might not ever be capable of sin, that they are innocent or not capable of intentionally harming or sinning in any manner, shape, or form. But what we would like to suggest to you is that each child of God deserves the consolation and the peace of the sacrament, regardless of disability. And everyone in every human frailty that we all live in and experience, we are all capable of sin in some capacity. So there's not one of us that are born angels, that each of us does have a humanity and a frailty, which sometimes we make bad choices. We're not necessarily making good choices, but we make bad choices. So that this concept applies to both persons with disabilities and persons who are not living with disabilities. So let's look at some resources. Oh, I'm sorry. That's again, talking a little bit more about our challenges with the Sacrament of Reconciliation. To just further elaborate on that, the myth of the eternal child, where even a young adult, a teen, a young adult who is living with a disability has a mindset of an eternal child. So they're always living in this perpetual innocence and incapable of sin. It is a myth. It is a myth. Again, in our humanity and in our frailty of that humanity, we are all capable of making a mistake, making an intentional mistake. Perceived reality of the lack of sin is what we were just describing, that persons with disabilities, even those living with significant disabilities, still have the reality of experiencing sin in some capacity. We are not angels living on earth. Each of us is human, and by our humanity, open to that frailty. Dialogue with the unique challenges of those who are nonverbal. So as our clergy, and we have pictured here Father Mark Smith, who at the time was at Holy Redeemer in College Park, is one of our pastors who is so gracious with learning new and creative ways to communicate with those who might be nonverbal, using either paper, using a tablet, using cards, being willing to look beyond for an out-of-the-box response to working with those who might be nonverbal, and working with adaptations to the formula for the reception of the Sacrament of Reconciliation. So again, seeking out those out-of-the-box ways that are approved for use for the experience of the reception of the sacrament, and ensuring that this process and approach is shared with the clergy from the very beginning. So as we are working, and there might be a different answer for every person who presents, so that what worked with one person might not be the answer for the next person. And so yet another reason that it's very important to share the process and the approach as we move along the way, and how very important that is for us to remember that what we want to do is ensure that we're not at the last minute, the day of the first reconciliation, saying, Father, here's an iPad, this is what we're going to do, but ensure that everyone is fully aware of the process and how we got there.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing the unique challenges that the Sacrament of Reconciliation does pose for our clergy, catechists, and parents. Of course, we were talking about the actual reception of the Sacrament of Reconciliation, but as we prepare children, teens, and maybe in some parishes, adults, for their first time receiving the Sacrament of Reconciliation, one of the first steps, of course, is teaching right from wrong. Pictured here is one tool available through Loyola Press Adaptive Finding God curriculum. Here you can see a simple picture of a thumbs down and a sad face, a thumbs up with a smiley face, and pictured here is some clouds with some sun rays coming out of it, which is used throughout Loyola Press to show God. So again, simple ways pictorially to show children that when you make a good choice, thumbs up, smiling, that helps us to be closer to God. When we make bad choices, thumbs down, not smiling, that helps us to move further from God. So all children, teens, and adults at some level really do have that intuitive spirit to know when people are not happy. I've worked with people with very significant disabilities, and their sense of other people's emotions is very clear. They can easily see when you're happy with them through your smiles, through your body language. And they can also see when you're sad or even perhaps angry. So again, these simple tools of thumbs up, thumbs down can be one possible means to begin that process of teaching right from wrong, good choice versus bad choice. Here again is another adaptation through the Loyola Press materials. And there are others also available as well through University of Dayton and some of our other Catholic publishers. But here today, we will highlight the Loyola Press. So again, here is about saying you're sorry. And pictured here is a girl here, and she's also doing the sign here for sorry. And when we forgive each other, again, our faces change. And again, all children, teens, and adults can have that capacity at some level to understand happy versus sad in expressions. So when we're sorry, we do not have the happy face because we've done something wrong. But when we forgive one another, then of course we are happy and back together. This particular adaptation for helping children with significant learning needs, learning good choices and bad choices, was created by Maria Harrington, a catechist at St. Raphael's Church in Rockville, Maryland. So pictured here, Maria took a common adaptation used in public schools, board maker. And she created these images. And again, we know that us as catechists and teachers, we have to make some assumptions about the common bad choices that children do, like saying mean things, right? That's pretty common. And here again, hitting. So she had to make some choices about what to actually show here. And here, the child teen would take these squares here, and with her guidance and the other catechist there would decide, is hitting here a good choice or a bad choice? And they would take these squares here and place them into the bad choice category. And also pictured here is sharing. And again, they would take this square and place it. Is this a good choice or a bad choice? So again, Maria did make some assumptions about common bad choices and good choices that a child or teen may make. But again, another helpful tool that is pictorial with words as well, in addition. And again, the child is learning good choice versus bad choice.
Where there are ways as well to learn using different methodologies. As we all are familiar with the various learning styles, here is an example of how we can use our hands to learn. So we might not be learning by repeating words or prayers, but instead we are able to actually manipulate this particular puzzle piece. Again, this is from Loyola Press. We're using examples today from Loyola Press, where you can actually move the pieces to say when it is that you are forgiven, and expressing by actually manipulating and moving the piece. So using our hands to learn and expressing our knowledge by doing. So by acting and by doing and by moving these pieces, we are able to have an alternate way of manifesting, understanding, manifesting, and showing that we are able to understand the lesson that is being shared. As we then prepare for the sacrament of reconciliation, each of us, all of us, should go through a process of an examen. So we all are asked to examine our conscience. So that next step to receiving the sacrament is to consider, and something that we all should be doing as we approach the sacrament. And there are adapted ways here to consider our choices. So as we look at this particular, again, from Loyola Press, this particular examination of conscience, you can see that there are things that are suggested. Have I done this or I haven't done that? It's an opportunity to really just stop and to think as we prepare for the reception of the sacrament, what it is that we might wish to share during the sacrament. So in this examination of conscience, and here we have, this is done by Maria Harrington, a catechist from St. Raphael's. She actually has examples done and ready in a social story fashion. So the caregiver or the catechist uses examples of bad choices. So here is something where they didn't listen to mom and dad. And again, Maria used some of the most common things that were manifest and expressed during her time as a catechist to make these particular strips of social stories to help the child share then what they want to share with the confessor in a social story. So these strips then are chosen and placed in a sealed envelope and given to the confessor. The confessor then reads the strips and offers absolution. The adapted prayers are read together or with a caregiver as penance. So there is an opportunity for the child to have this chance to stop, to think, to consider, and then to share in a way that is appropriate for them with the particular confessor in the reception of the sacrament, the active reception of the sacrament. There are also ways that we can have adapted prayers, such as the act of contrition here. Again, assure that the clergy are familiar with all of these resources and methodologies well in advance. These social story examples and adapted materials are, again, these are provided by Loyola Press, but such a beautiful, simple act of contrition that can be shared between the penitent and the confessor. That is something that can be done together and prayed together. Another resource that we would like to mention at this time is that there are videos available on the National Catholic Office for the Deaf, NCOD. Their website has some wonderful resources with videos that are very appropriate for use with deaf children, where things are presented, they are closed captioned, spoken in English and in Spanish, and signed in American Sign Language.
Thank you so much, Mary, for also sharing the resource available through NCOD. And it's also been our experience that children living with autism can also benefit from those videos, and they are certainly available to all catechists, parents, and caregivers. So let's just review some tips for accommodation. First, we have to, of course, consider the environment. As we saw previously in the guidelines, sometimes confessionals do not even allow physical access. But also, some children living with autism or other types of developmental disabilities need more space actually to feel comfortable. So especially churches that might be shaped in a more circular fashion, the children and teens can be spread out through the church to maintain privacy. And then the confessor can move to each child. And of course, that gives parents as well some comfort in the sacrament, privacy, and also the availability for their child to feel like they can move about if necessary. And Mary discussed earlier about learning through doing, and we know as well this benefits all children, not just children living with disabilities, but to visit the church space or where reconciliation will take place. And even more ideally is continual visits from the pastor or confessor, whoever may be participating with the child in the Sacrament of Reconciliation. So the child's not meeting a very unfamiliar face in this, I'm sure, nerve-wracking time. And this is beautifully expressed also in the guidelines that God understands the heart of the penitent. It's not our role to make assumptions about the person, whether they are truly sorry or not. That is the dialogue between the penitent and the confessor, but we assume that God is present, of course, in all of our sacraments, and that God understands their heart. And as we showed some adaptations as well earlier, sorrow for sins does not always is expressed through words. Gestures can be used, symbols. As we showed earlier, there was a card showing I'm sorry. The child could hold up that card at the end of the sacrament to show that they were sorry. They can also, again, bring those pictures, as we showed, to adaptations of sins after their examination of conscience. And again, just to emphasize that updates in 2017, communication systems, including iPads, are permissible during confession. The key part, of course, is ensuring that that is deleted or otherwise, if someone is using a paper adaptation, that those items are destroyed immediately after the confession. Mary and I experienced a beautiful story from a pastor here in the Archdiocese, sharing his experience regarding that Sacrament of Reconciliation. There's a set time, as in many parishes, for confession. An older man came who had a stroke and was not able to communicate with words as he was in the past. So the pastor assumed that, in fact, he had come for confession. So again, it sounds like a simple example, but God knows the heart of the penitent. And the pastor here showed great compassion and understanding for that parishioner. And as we showed in one earlier adaptation, where perhaps the parent is helping the child with their examination of conscience at home prior to the reception of the Sacrament of Reconciliation, parents are very key. Parents are caregivers, and we know sometimes grandparents and other relatives, to kind of assist them in that process, because most often they are the most familiar with the way they communicate and how. So again, that family involvement, as we know with all of our children and teens, is very key. Many of our priests report how their heart was changed during an encounter with a child with disability during the Sacrament of Reconciliation. So as we're assisting our clergy to understand these adaptations, we can also share with them that mutual transformation that does happen during the sacrament. And we do, again, have other adaptive prayers, including Hail Mary and Our Father. So again, we can have those materials available for the confessors so they can give an appropriate penance for the child, which could include Hail Mary using pictures, and then they can immediately complete their penance after confession.
We'd like to just kind of conclude this portion of our webinar with a few thoughts and reflections. And the one, I believe, one of the most important things for us to consider is that we are not a whole church when we are missing members. It's kind of like when you host a dinner party and there's an empty chair. You're very aware that someone isn't there. And so always remembering that we are a whole church when all are welcomed and valued in this space. Our baptism calls us to one church family. There cannot be a separate church for persons with disabilities. This comes right out of the USCCB's pastoral statement on persons with disabilities, just emphasizing that there is no separate church, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. A pastor, priest, and catechist cannot have all the answers, so be willing to walk and journey with the family. And again, every walk and every journey is very unique. And so what might be a successful methodology with one specific family or one specific individual might not fit at all with the next family or individual that you work with. So just being willing to make that journey. Including people with disabilities mutually transforms the parish could not be stated anymore. This is probably the most important sentence of the entire webinar, is that if our hearts are allowing us to become mutually transformed, then we are truly being that one body in Christ by recognizing Christ in all the faces that we encounter, allowing ourselves to be mutually transformed. Support people with disabilities as a visible sign of a culture of life in your parish, as lectors, altar servers, choir members, that persons with disabilities don't simply have to be receiving. They can also be giving and are gifted and have so many gifts to share. A person with a disability is unique, just like you and I. There is no, oh, all persons living with Down syndrome, or all persons living with autism, or all persons who are deaf. Every person is a unique child of God. And to be open to the yes, and then work on the how. And the how might be different in whatever situation you find yourself in at that time, and ever changing and evergreen. So being open again to the journey. And it is an exciting journey. It is a beautiful journey, and one that does transform both the catechist, the individual living with a disability, the pastoral staff. All are enhanced by this embracing of all the children of God. What we'd like to do now is take some time for questions. So in doing this, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording and give you a chance to think about what questions you might like to ask, or a topic that you would like to discuss. But we're going to go ahead and stop the recording and bring everyone